Team USA racking up gold medals at the Winter Olympics, but not without a bit of controversy. Snowboarder Shaun White put on a show in the men's halfpipe. His dominating performance earned the U.S. its 100th gold medal of all time. We're talking about Winter Olympics, of course. But his comments after winning also grabbed headlines. He dismissed sexual misconduct allegations against him as gossip. He later apologized.
There's also controversy in women's snowboarding after several athletes crashed in the slopestyle event on Monday. Organizers have been criticized for holding the competition despite high winds. CBS Sports writer Bill Reiter is here with more on these snowboarding controversies. Thanks for joining us.
You bet, guys.
So we constantly hear about concussions with football, with hockey. That's certainly not the case generally with snowboarding. So tell us about some of these injuries that female snowboarders in the Olympics are suffering from.
Yeah, it was a vicious run for almost every single competitor. Obviously, these are guys world-class athletes. 4 out of 5 of the female snowboarders in the slopestyle event fell. Tess Coady from Australia, the 17-year-old, tore her ACL. Even Jamie Anderson, the American who won gold, said it was not a run that she was proud of, but given the dangerous conditions, at least she got through it. We're talking about some gruesome falls in a situation where, as you pointed out, those CTE and concussions are usually a focal point of football. It's true in any sport where there's head injuries, where there's contact repeatedly to the head. And we saw a lot of falls yesterday. We won't know. CTE is not something you can diagnose until folks have passed away. But there's certainly some concerns. What we saw yesterday underscores the dangers across a lot of sports to athletes when they have repeated trauma to the brain.
Right, because those walls are on the halfpipe. They're like 22 feet. I mean, if you drop, it's a major drop. And we're talking about snowboarding, but certainly not the only sport that is dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, alpine skiing, really, I mean, women's hockey has several players, and the Americans have been great. They dominated Russia, which I know is a country we feel good about, but they have several players who have repeated headaches and have talked a little bit about concussions. And the problem with this is that major sports where there are concussion problems, where there's clear evidence as best we can have it over time, longitudinal data, talk about football, hockey, soccer, even then there's this desire by the powers that be and the folks who compete to play down concussions. That's certainly been true at the Olympics. So alpine skiing, snowboarding, hockey, any event with even a modicum of danger to head trauma, and that increases when you have these weather conditions, CTE and concussions become a real long-term concern.
So, Bill, why was the women's event canceled? Sorry, why was the men's event canceled, but the women's allowed to continue?
That is a great question that I don't have an answer for, and no one in South Korea who's in charge of these things seem to have a good answer for. And I've covered Olympics before. I've covered Summer Olympics before. It's a really inspiring event, and I don't want to be negative about it, but there's so much power and control that the Olympic Committee and the various countries have. It's hard to get answers. We don't know. Clearly there was a danger. Clearly people were injured. Clearly people were affected by the weather. And there have not been good answers yet as to why some events were canceled, as well they should have been, and some, like slopestyle for the women, was not, when also certainly they were in danger being out there.
Okay, so let's talk about Shaun White. He wins another gold medal. It's great. I mean, he looks thrilled, and he answers a handful of questions, I think 8 or so questions, and one of them has to do with sexual harassment allegations. He dismissed them sort of as gossip, and, you know, some of these allegations he's already agreed that he's sort of guilty of, but he used the word gossip, and then it seems he's sort of corrected himself.
Yeah, the tone deafness of that moment was pretty stunning. Shaun White basically ran off the podium when challenged with questions about allegations of sexual harassment on his end. I think it's noteworthy that not a single question was allowed to be asked by a female reporter, and there were a lot of reporters in that room trying to ask about this latest twist and convergence of the Me Too movement and sports. And you said it, he has not denied all of these allegations. If you read the details of the lawsuit, it's a woman who was in a band that Shaun White was a part of a few years ago. As we've seen in a lot of Me Too movement stories, it's really, really ugly stuff. Called it gossip, ran away, gave what I think a lot of folks felt like a half-hearted apology. And it's a reminder that this problem is everywhere, because he's not just the face of snowboarding, he is the sport itself, at least on the men's side.
You know, it's interesting that you point out that he is the face of snowboarding, because he had just addressed him. If he had allowed women reporters to ask the questions and he had been upfront about it, he has been upfront about the fact that he sent sexually explicit messages to this band member. Now, because he's stonewalled, because he's made what some perceive to be flippant comments, reporters are very dogged, as you know, Bill. You are one. I don't think that this is going to be something, well, he made a comment, we're moving on. I just sort of feel like this is probably not going to play out very well for him, for his standing in the Olympics, and perhaps even his snowboarding career.
I think you're absolutely right. And we see this a lot in the Olympics. The rare times that real controversy comes to Olympic sports, Olympic athletes, Olympic figures, they're very rarely able to handle it with any effectiveness because they spend years of their lives being covered by niche reporters, and then the mainstream media rolls in and real journalists, no offense to those who cover these sports every day, roll in asking harder-hitting questions. And these guys and these folks and these men and women live in ivory towers. And you're right. The problem for White was there was a total lack of authenticity. He seemed not to care about the allegations, and that dismissiveness, whether it's optics as a PR spin or it's a human being owning up to whatever mistakes they've made, it is a bad look. And at this point of the Me Too movement, not everyone, but a lot of Americans are tired of it.
And you pointed out something that's interesting, that many of these individuals in the Olympic committees live in these glass or ivory towers, we should say. And that's been proven time and time again. There have been allegations of corruption, of bribery, of even the controversy that has swirled around Russia. Now you have athletes participating under, athletes from Russia.
Right.
Everybody gets it. I mean, you can't be from Russia and say, I didn't win a medal. I'm a Russian figure skater. I won a medal, and I am from Russia. So my point is this, that this controversy, the Olympic Committee, given their track record and the history of how they deal with controversies like this, I'm not really heartened.
I'm not either. And I love the Olympics. I can remember covering women's gymnastics in London. It was a high point for me professionally. It was really meaningful. But even back then, we would, the general media, ask, the questions you ask. When negative things happen, we would ask about it. And the folks who covered gymnastics every day, not all of them, but many of them would look at you kind of askance. And it turns out 4 years later, what we know is that there was a really dark undercurrent to USA gymnastics, some real ugliness that no one had addressed and a lot of folks in the mainstream media weren't aware of. And so that's the extreme case. But when there's not a lot of accountability, when there's not a lot of criticism, when folks are allowed to do what Shaun White did and usually get away with it, which is roll his eyes in effect and walk away from difficult questions, it doesn't lead to a culture that polices itself very effectively when these sorts of things come up.
Yeah.
Bill Reiter, always great to have you. Thank you so much.
You got it. Anytime.